Hello, and welcome to another episode of Thoroughly Thriving, where we're putting human back in human capital solutions. On today's episode, we're going to hear from an industry leader where they're sharing their thoughts, feedback, and perspective on what's happening in today's world of work. Well, let's stay tuned and perk our ears up for another exciting episode. Well, welcome to another episode of Thoroughly Thriving. Sean, this is my favorite part of the week when we get to meet with thought leaders, movers and shakers in the industry, people that are certainly passionate about advancing global health. And today we have none other than Harris Soifer joining us on Thoroughly Thriving. Harris is a leader in precision medicine and oncology, and he brings a fascinating perspective on both science and the people behind drug development. So Harris earned his PhD in molecular biology and biochemistry, and he began his career in academia before making the transition into industry, a move that would ultimately take him through research, diagnostics, translational medicine, and drug development, and into his current leadership role in precision medicine at Cura Oncology. But what makes Harris's story particularly interesting is that it's not just about the positions he's held. It's about the evolution that happened along the way. He's experienced the challenges from academia into industry, learned some important lessons early in his career about understanding exactly what you're stepping into, and has continued to evolve as the science and the industry itself has changed. Today, his work sits at the intersection of precision medicine, biomarkers, diagnostics, and oncology. And while he's also thinking deeply about emerging technologies like AI, what they actually mean for drug discovery and clinical development. And it's just as important that Harris has made mentorship and developing others a meaningful part of his career. So today, we're going to talk about his journey, the lessons he's learned along the way, the realities of building a career in life sciences where precision medicine and AI are headed, and why paying it forward matters. Harris, welcome to Thoroughly Thriving.
Thank you, Darren. Thank you, Sean, for the invitation to come and speak.
Harris, we're looking forward to today's conversation. And I know you and I have run into each other in the halls and other things over the years. And so I'm excited to have this conversation because I think you've got a lot to bring to our audience. And you, as Darren mentioned, you have really a fascinating background. I want to jump right into our first question today because I think this is something you can speak really, really well to. Is we talk to a lot of candidates who are wanting to make the jump from academic research into industry, right? It's something that we regularly have conversations with people. And so we'd love to give them feedback from people who are now on the other side of that decision. Can you tell us a little bit about what pushed you to make that move? And looking back, like, what do you wish you'd really understood going in?
Appreciate it. I was trained in a PhD program that was very academically oriented. So early on in my career, being a scientist outside of academia, I didn't even know what options were available. We were, as a PhD student, we were taught that the real science happens in academia, sort of a very conceited view. And so I progressed from PhD, and my last year of my PhD, I was planning what my academic postdoc was going to be.
Mm-hmm.
I happened to be very fortunate, and I landed a prestigious Beckman Fellowship out of my postdoc. So I got a little bit better view of what academic research was like because I could fund my own ideas. I think that fueled that desire to try to make it or break it in academia. So I had a successful postdoc. I managed to secure a pre-faculty instructor position at Albert Einstein, right at the time where the NIH was developing new programs to support young investigators. And so I said, okay, I've got the support of my institution. I've got the support of the NIH through these programs. And then I think I ran into the reality of what an NIH funding pay line is. And around 2011, when the funding pay line went from maybe 20% to about 5%, I quickly realized that the options in academia were dwindling. Laboratories were shutting down all across Albert Einstein. Clinician researchers were going back to full-time clinic work and closing down their laboratories. And at the time, I had a lot of friends in big pharma who were that's at the time when they were closing those very large campuses in New Jersey.
Yeah.
A lot of consolidation in the industry. The recession was really hitting, and I was seeing my postdoc colleagues get laid off with very, very little notice. However, my pharma colleagues were all getting laid off with sort of a new term to me, which was a severance package. And at the time, we all have children, we all have families. I began to see how the road in academia, was likely going to be paved with these starts and stops. And the options within the pharma industry at that time, right? When there's attrition within the industry, that just means that there's new opportunity. And around 2013, I took an opportunity to leave academia. I left my research project that I had been working on for about a decade behind. That was probably the hardest decision. Was to literally leave all my material in the freezer, pack up, and begin kind of a new career, transitioning from more kind of basic cancer research into more of the diagnostics kind of biomarker field. Again, this is the 2013 at the time of the recession. So I took a job in a very early stage startup company that was founded by a former scientist at the City of Hope. And it was so early stage that we were working out of a converted home.
Wow.
So we were we had a CAP CLIA laboratory.
Oh,
that was certified within this. We had converted a home to a diagnostic mitochondrial disease diagnostic laboratory, and we're doing clinical diagnostic testing for mitochondrial disease very successfully. Because it was one of the first next generation sequencing diagnostic tests for a rare indication. But that's sort of how ground level we went.
wow.
Roger, when I'm asking this question, I'm not thinking about the academic transition from academia to a converted home.
To a garage.
To a garage, basically, right?
My advice to people looking to make that transition from academia to industry is you have to take any available early opportunity.
Yeah. Get that foot in the door. Yeah.
Yes.
Wow. Well, it sounds like it was a bit of an interesting transition and segue, to say the least, Harris. And you've mentioned early that those experiences really taught you hard lessons about understanding exactly, now kind of looking from your purview, from your vantage point, what that transition looks like, what the role is and isn't. But can you share that story, like what it taught you about kind of reading a role correctly before you're in it?
Oh, that's a great question. I think my initial exposure to the level of kind of startup company that I had entered into, I think it set my mindset that rolling up my sleeves and doing something from the ground up meant that I could function within industry at any level, whether it's the startup or the mid-size biotech, or my second role that I tried to interview for was at Genentech. And it was in that role where I took this sort of false sense of confidence that I had, and went into that interview for a scientist role, and not understanding that within certain large organizations like large pharma, there are different tracks to different roles. There's there's the group leader role, which is very much more like the academic principal investigator role. And then there's the scientist track, which is it's a vertical track for sure, but it's a more terminal track. And I recall when I was interviewing for that role at Genentech, I went in with my bravado thinking that my future was the group leader track, but the role was on the scientist track. And it was a very intriguing role, very good. But I could tell after my first interview, when I was interviewing with somebody and they asked me, what is your ultimate goal here? I said, oh, I want to be like you. I want to be the group leader. And they clearly said, but this is not that role. And this track will never be that role. It's a different. And that was the first sense that I had that companies are structured very differently than academia, which is very much more like a startup type of environment. So know the role, know the company, and know what they're expecting out of that. When you're thinking about promoting from that role, what is that next position going to be? Because that's going to tell you what track they have in mind.
That's really good and really helpful. We try to tell candidates all the time, thinking beyond just like this specific role. What's the growth opportunity? What's the track on this? Where are you hoping to be in, X amount of time? Even though big picture, the average tenure is not that long with individual companies, you never want to go into an opportunity thinking, well, just the next 12 months, thinking next, like, it's like, what is the future offer for me professionally? And I love how you talk about like knowing not just the role, but the track. Because to your point, like that scientist has a pretty limited, track in terms of where it can go. I want to pivot back a little bit to your transition. A lot of people we talked to that have made this academia to industry transition talk about that first step. Because obviously a journey of 1,000 miles starts with the first step, right? It's always very important, but not so much what happens after. What happens 2 years, 5 years, even 10 years down the road? Can you help us to walk through maybe what that longer arc has looked like for you? Maybe some of the challenges you experienced in those first few years of making the move to industry, and maybe what you would tell someone who's a few years into their career, maybe not quite on the track that they're looking for, and some tips you may be able to provide there.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think when I made my transition, I was very much focused on, well, I'm a scientist, so I'm going to look for those scientific roles. It fit very much my experience at the time. I think what the piece that I was missing was everything around the project planning, the budget, the actual business side of the science. I had no experience in, no interest in. I think another thing, looking back, if I would make that transition again, there are a lot of opportunities for people making that transition from academia into industry. I took the very straightforward science route, but I think other awesome entry points are quality, medical affairs. That's, I think, what people maybe don't realize in academia is that with the right story, you can show that you have expertise in scientific communications, publication writing, right? You have those skills. So I think people think that their primary skill is research and development, but there are other roles in industry where capitalizing on those, there's opportunity there. I don't think, and then obviously finding the right entry.
Thank you, Harris. There has been a lot of momentum, a lot of content out there about the part that AI, machine learning, plays in drug discovery and clinical development. You and I have had conversations about this, which is why we thought it was important to have as a topic in our conversation today. During those conversations, Harris, you've shared some strong opinions AI has in participating in clinical development and even being, in some instances, a foundational piece. Where do you see AI genuinely changing how drugs get discovered and developed? And in your opinion, where are people overhyping it?
I think there's there. So I think starting with the overhype. I
Yeah.
think biology is complicated, and the thoughts around building virtual cells, virtual pathways, doing high content screening, replacing a lot of the more manual biology and candidate discovery. I think there's some hype there. Where I've seen smaller companies, and again, I'll speak from that perspective because it's a little bit more close to my experience. I think we've used it on our small precision medicine team to just to amplify the productivity and the workout product output from the team. So we've used our enterprise AI system to almost like a virtual expert in the room, right? So we have regulatory a regulatory framework built out in that. We have some quality control frameworks built out, right? So additional kind of support tools from the productivity perspective. But are we really kind of crunching omics analysis and generating new hypotheses and stuff? I mean, a lot of that is still based on the biology and based on our own kind of human in the loop interaction. But to get to that point and bring all that data together and standardize it and not have to have structured data like we used to have before we had some machine learning tools, that's cut down on the time to the human inference by several factors. And that's where we've made important strides. Just by cutting down on the time from raw data analysis to actual human inference. For some of our analyses, we're getting same day. We're meeting at the end of the day as a
Wow.
team to kind of go over some of the correlative data analyses. Whereas we would have to bring in multiple teams and do that in a couple, several weeks of
Wow.
time. So just being able to kind of think about next steps and plan has been important. Where I can say that we're not doing it, at least on our team, is in actual modeling or candidate selection so much. It's been a productivity tool and a way to get us to our human inference quicker with
Yeah.
better quality control and understanding.
It is, to the funny point you said about all the hype, right? Because I think there's so much out there, and I think some people, the first thought is, how can I be more efficient? And yet others, it's, how am I going to be replaced? And there's this, tension on the in between of like, where do I fit along this time frame of like, okay, but I have found the most effective, and obviously I'd love your insight on this, of aspect of AI is you still need a human driver. You still need the right director pointing this way, pointing that way, and even still, to some extent, pressure testing the result you get from it. Because the easy route is to just throw it in, kick it out, run with it, and wow, that made my life easier. But we're still having to do the evaluation, do the pressure testing, do really a lot of the detail evaluation. Yes, it can help, but I think we still need a human involvement. Would you say that's probably pretty accurate?
Yeah, I mean, especially within the drug development field, I mean, everything has to be reproducible. It has to be traceable. Um, and what we found on, at Cura was we would get very nice one-off generative AI, outputs. And then when we would go to do the workflow again, same prompt, you get down a rabbit hole and maybe it may not give you the same result. So being able to bring the data together quickly without having to put it into a data structure like we used to have to do when we're bringing it in from multiple sources, having a computer assisted quality control check on that data. Again, it just brings us to that human in the loop piece a lot faster with a lot more confidence. And then when we go to run that workflow again, it's standardized. It brings us to the human in the loop piece where our custom or our individual analyses are being generated.
Yeah, well, and the human element, I think, is still a huge part of everything that we do, whether we're using it or not. And I think to kind of transition over to my next question, I think the human element is a big thing that you're passionate about. You've talked to us specifically about how much you value mentorship and you value being able to, essentially help others in the field, almost altruistically, more so than anything else. I think in the same way, like true mentorship, we can listen to podcasts, we can read books, and those are helpful. But I think in the same way, having true human interaction in a training and mentorship type of environment is probably where it's most effective. But can you tell us a little bit about why this is so important to you, why it matters so much to you, and what are some of the practical things that you do to put it into practice?
I would say it's probably my academic roots, where sort of the mentorship is practiced. I've also been fortunate to be at organizations where they've promoted internship programs. Um, they've promoted within the company. I've experienced and seen, I think, seen how finding advocates outside of your function
Mhm.
can is particularly important within a company,
Yeah.
because as you grow in your career, somebody said, one of my academic professors said this to me very early on. It's something I've always taken away. The higher you get in your career, the more and more subjective your promotion becomes.
Mm.
So it's not, at some point, it becomes not so much about what you do, but how you do it, and and learning from others, and
Wow.
finding mentors. Even people who are, maybe at a company, they're a level or two below you, but they're in another function, or they communicate very well, or they have a skill that you don't have, that is important at that point to your subjective promotion. It's that's extremely important. I think many people may not have enough humility to maybe recognize
Wow.
that. But the important thing, I think, is to, because I've experienced it firsthand. At some point, it's not brains that gets you where you are. It's
Yeah.
how you do it. It's how you lead people, and you can't keep doing that unless you're kind of learning from other people around you.
Yeah.
So at Cura, we want to bring in people who are looking for that sort of vertical, that next step, right? Because as you mentioned, Sean, I think earlier on, those are the ones who get everything done day to day. They're forward thinkers, right? They're not going to be um, derailed by kind of additional ad hoc responsibilities that seem to be, that's the new normal in corporate, right? Do more with less. Um, the, and so to be able to kind of promote that way of working from the ground up is super helpful in an organization. And like I said, you as the mentor, the goal is to get more out of that relationship than the mentee. Sounds a
Yeah.
little bit reversed, but if you're doing it correctly, you do that. And again, I think your I think people's acceleration in their career at some point becomes much more about how you communicate, how you go about doing your business, than what exactly you're doing.
We talk about this a lot here at Third Group, and working with candidates and clients. We love working with both candidates and clients, Harris, that have, I think, the most important ability. And the most important ability, in my opinion, is dependability. And it goes really, it aligns with what you were saying. It's not so much about what you know, but how you go about doing what you know.
Yeah.
And if you're not dependable to yourself, well, you can't give away something you don't have, right? So I feel like it's an intrinsic value. And I love working and mentoring and supporting people that are dependable, that are showing up, that are hungry, that have this almost insatiable drive to learn and get better. And we thrive on that. We love helping people out, and that's a byproduct, of really, of driving things and getting to understand people a little bit better. So yeah, we completely identify with that.
Yeah, and I love your perspective, Harris. You talk about not just what you do, but how you do it. And I think that mentorship piece plays a big part in, like we're all ignorant if we're not thinking our careers are built on the shoulders of giants of others that have come before us, and people we've learned from, and people we've developed with, and all of those sorts of things. And I love, this is part of who you are. It's not a characteristic that you added into your tool belt later. Like, this is part of your DNA, is being really altruistic in that mentorship and that driving future generations and future folks, but also knowing that you are receiving in that relationship as well, and developing other areas and things that can help build out in your career. I think it's been really a pleasure having you today, Harris. And it's funny how I wasn't thinking about this when we kind of mapped it out, but it lands perfectly into how we like to end every episode here at Thoroughly Thriving, because we really have a foundational principle, or whatever you want to call it, that really is like a core value for us that we wrap every episode with, which is that we only can win as one if we work as one. And I think that it's so foundational that we think about holistically winning in our organization and our team. It's a core value we have even at Thorough Group with our team members. It's that, like, we work as one, therefore we win as one. But if we start isolating and working off in different directions, and it's only about me and it's only about those sorts of things, like, we don't achieve the holistic end goal. And I know that you're experiencing, as we were even talking about earlier, greater successes and new frontiers in your career as you're learning this transition into commercial and all these other things, because of the holistic success of the group coming together, and working together as one, which is really powerful stuff.
Yeah, I think we, within this field of being in drug development and oncology or whatever other drug development field you're in, I think the anchor is the patients, right?
Yeah.
So and I think a lot of companies have adopted that, right? The team philosophy, working as one for patients. It does bring everybody back together to kind of what the sole objective is.
Absolutely. Well, it's been a pleasure having you today. We'll get all of Harris's contact information in the show notes. Thank you, everyone, for listening to another great episode of Thoroughly Thriving. We look forward to talking with you again soon. Don't forget to work as one and win as one. Have a great week. Thank you for joining us today for another great episode of Thoroughly Thriving. If you enjoyed today's episode, please feel free to share it with those in your world. If you'd like to learn more about the Thorough Group, please go to thoroughgroup.com. And remember that we will all remain thoroughly thriving if we continue to work as one and win as one.